What if a peaceful nation known for IKEA furniture and serene lakes once ruled half of Europe with an iron fist? What decisions transformed fierce Viking raiders into one of the most stable, peaceful countries on earth? How did Sweden's kings wield power so terrifying that entire empires trembled before them? And what irreversible choices carved the path from chaos to harmony? These questions unlock a saga of ambition, war, and survival that still echoes through history. Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, like it, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you. 1,000 years ago, the lands of what we now call Sweden were wild and fragmented, inhabited by tribes of Svear and Götar. These people spoke languages close yet distinct, lived in longhouses built from wood and turf, and survived brutal winters that lasted months on end. Their world was harsh, unforgiving, yet rich with resilience. A world where iron was forged, ships crafted, and stories of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya were told by the fireside. But this was no simple pastoral life. It was a crucible where honor and strength shaped every human choice. The stage was set for epic conflicts ahead. Imagine the roar of drakkars, slender warships slicing through icy waters, their dragon-headed prows cutting the mist like the very embodiment of fear itself. These Viking ships were masterpieces of engineering, swift enough to conquer both open sea and shallow rivers. They carried not just warriors, but traders, adventurers, and emissaries, Varangians who would sail eastward into the realms of Rus, reach Constantinople's marble walls, and return laden with silk and gold. These daring voyages blurred the lines between piracy and commerce, between chaos and order. The fate of nations hung on the edges of these swift vessels. Yet beneath the blood and steel lay a fragile order, born from oral laws debated at the Ting, the People's Assembly. Here, every free man's voice counted in choosing leaders, settling disputes, and defining justice. The real power belonged to noble jarls who controlled lands and warriors, but even they could not ignore the collective will. Sweden's early democracy was a paradox, fierce individual freedom tempered by loyalty to kin and community. The tension between liberty and hierarchy would fuel decisions echoing for centuries. What drives a people to transcend their origins as raiders and merchants, to become architects of peace and stability? How does a society balance the demands of honor and survival against the necessities of governance and diplomacy? The story of Sweden is a profound meditation on human fear, ambition, and the irreversible choices that shape destiny. It is an ancient parable about learning to live not just with enemies, but with oneself, amid shadows of past bloodshed and glimmers of future hope. By the late 8th century after Christ, the world was shifting. Tribes hardened into kingdoms, conflicts escalated, and the once scattered Svear and Götar faced crossroads that would redefine their identity. The decisions made during this turbulent era would unleash waves of violence and transformation, but also lay foundations for a nation that centuries later would be synonymous with social equality and peace. The question remains, what price was paid to secure this legacy? From the icy forests to the burning cities, from the clashing swords on frozen bogs to the gold of distant empires, Sweden's story is not simply a chronicle of kings and battles. It is a relentless journey marked by choices where every victory exacted a cost and each defeat demanded rebirth. As the Viking Age dawned, these northern lands were poised on the brink of a fate that would forever alter the course of European history. Understanding this path is to peer into the raw heart of human decision-making under pressure, where fear ignites ambition, and ambition demands sacrifice. It is why Sweden's saga resonates far beyond its borders. It is a testament to how a people can evolve, not erase their past, but transform it. Subscribe to Quiet History and dive deeper into the twisted, dramatic saga of Sweden, the nation born of fire, ice, and fate. What drives a man to risk everything on a stormy sea? What forces push entire peoples to abandon their homes and plunge into the unknown? In the late 8th century, the shores of Europe trembled under the relentless raids of Viking warriors. These were no random acts of violence. They were born from desperation, opportunity, and the ruthless calculus of survival. Overpopulation squeezed the fertile lands of Scandinavia, leaving younger sons with no inheritance and no future but the open sea. But was it merely hunger that sent them forth, or something far darker? The answer lies in the deadly dance of fate and ambition that would change history forever. Imagine the terror that gripped the monks of Lindisfarne in 793, when the first known Viking raid shattered their sanctuary. Gold and silver, treasures meant for God, were stolen in the blink of an eye. Europe's kingdoms, fractured by internal strife, offered little defense. The Vikings were seen as demons from the north, pagan marauders who burned, killed, and looted without mercy. Their name became synonymous with horror. In churches, desperate prayers echoed, "From the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord." Yet, behind this fear lay a complex reality. Different Viking groups had different paths and destinies. While Norwegian Vikings pushed westward to Britain, Iceland, and even the distant shores of America, and Danish warriors carved out realms in England and France, the Swedish Vikings turned their gaze east. They navigated the twisting rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volkhov, the Dnieper, the Volga, opening trade routes that linked the Baltic Sea to the Black and Caspian Seas. These waterways connected them to the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world, transforming raiders into traders, conquerors into settlers. The Slavs called them Varangians, the Arabs Rus. From their settlements grew cities, Old Ladoga, Novgorod, Kiev, birthplaces of new states forged in the crucible of cultural fusion. But life for a Swedish Viking was a gamble with death. Every voyage was a perilous gamble against storms, hidden reefs, and hostile enemies. The stakes were clear: return laden with gold, slaves, and glory, or never return at all. For those lost to the sea or the sword, only the songs of skalds kept their memory alive. These poets wove complex verses filled with metaphor and allusion, immortalizing the deeds of warriors and chieftains. Their art was as vital as the blade in battle, preserving the spirit of a people who lived on the edge of oblivion. At the heart of Viking belief was the unyielding grip of fate. They accepted that their lives were preordained, yet this knowledge did not breed resignation. Instead, It fueled their courage. To die in battle was the highest honor. Better to fall with sword in hand than to waste away in sickness or old age. Fallen warriors were believed to join Odin's Hall, Valhalla, where they would feast and fight until the final cataclysm, Ragnarok. This apocalyptic vision, where gods and giants would annihilate each other and the world would burn and be reborn, was no mere myth. It was a profound worldview, steeped in tragedy and heroism, shaping a people who faced death with unflinching resolve. Even Odin himself, the All-Father, knew his doom, but fought on relentlessly. This fierce philosophy forged the Viking spirit, unyielding, fearless, and relentless. Yet history is never static. By the end of the first millennium A.D., winds of change swept through Scandinavia. The Reformation had not yet arrived, but the 13th century saw the rise of crusades, not to the Holy Land, but eastward into the lands of the Finns and Karelians, still clinging to their pagan ways. Swedish kings and bishops seized these campaigns as both military conquests and sacred missions, blending faith and power in a deadly mix. The choices made in these brutal crusades would echo through centuries, shaping the fate of nations and the souls of men. What began as desperate raids evolved into empires and faith-driven wars. The Vikings, once feared as ruthless invaders, became founders of states and champions of new religions. Their legacy is a testament to the irreversible choices made on the edge of the world, choices that carved the map of Europe and forged the destiny of millions. Will you dare to follow their path, where every decision could mean glory or oblivion? The saga continues, and the echoes of their swords still ring across the ages. If you want to dive deeper into the shadows and triumphs of history, subscribe to Quiet History and join us on this relentless journey through time. What happens when faith becomes a weapon, when ancient beliefs are crushed under swords in the name of salvation? In the brutal crusades of medieval Scandinavia, the lands we now call Finland were mercilessly conquered and forced into Christianity, becoming part of the Swedish kingdom. Pagan shrines were razed to the ground, and those who resisted were baptized by force or faced the blade. Yet this dark campaign expanded Sweden's reach eastward, folding the Finnish people into its realm, even as they fiercely preserved their language and traditions. But this was only the beginning of a turbulent transformation, one that would plunge the kingdom into chaos. By the end of the 13th century, Sweden was no longer just a patchwork of scattered tribes. It had become a kingdom with defined borders, ruled by a king who leaned heavily on the church and nobility. Laws were written down and recognized across the land, promising order. But beneath this fragile veneer, Sweden was torn apart by internal strife. The crown held no clear succession laws. Kings were elected at the Ting, a gathering where rival noble families fiercely vied for power. These bitter disputes ignited civil wars that drained the kingdom's strength, leaving it vulnerable to enemies both near and far. The king's authority was often nothing more than a figurehead, restrained by powerful jarls and aristocrats who commanded their own armies and vast estates. Imagine a ruler shackled by his own noble class, unable to govern without their consent. The king's crown weighed heavy, but his hands were tied. This delicate balance of power rendered Sweden a powder keg ready to explode. The nobility's grip on the land meant the monarchy could never act decisively. Every decision was a negotiation, a gamble. As the 14th century dawned, these internal fractures left the kingdom ripe for catastrophe. Then came the plague, Black Death, sweeping across Europe in the mid-1300s, slashing the population by a terrifying third. Sweden was not spared. Entire villages vanished, fields lay fallow, and trade ground to a halt. The social fabric was torn apart. With so many lives lost, the labor force shrank dramatically, empowering surviving peasants to demand better treatment. The feudal lords' power crumbled alongside their wealth, dependent as it was on peasant toil. Yet, in the shadow of death, the church rose like a colossus. Desperate souls turned to God, donating riches to monasteries that swelled in power, while bishops emerged as political heavyweights in this fractured realm. Is it fate or choice that shapes a nation? How does a kingdom battered by disease and civil war find the strength to unite? In the final years of the 14th century, a momentous decision echoed across Scandinavia, one that would redefine the region for a century to come. In the year 1397, three kingdoms, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, were stitched together under a single monarch in what became known as the Kalmar Union. But what price was paid for this fragile unity? Behind this grand alliance stood a formidable woman, Queen Margaret I of Denmark. Daughter of a Danish king, wife to Norway's monarch, and regent for her young nephew, Margaret was no mere figurehead. She was a masterful politician, a negotiator who wielded power with ruthless precision. As Sweden staggered under the unpopular rule of Albrecht of Mecklenburg, a German prince, the Swedish nobility cried out for help. Margaret answered with force, sending armies to crush Albrecht's forces, capturing him and shattering his claim. Her influence swept into Sweden, where she and her nephew Eric of Pomerania were crowned rulers. The treaty signed in Kalmar that year promised a united front, three kingdoms bound by one crown, with shared foreign policy and defense. On paper, it seemed a strategy of strength against looming threats like the mighty Hanseatic League, which dominated Baltic trade. But beneath the surface, cracks festered. Sweden's nobility soon realized that real power slipped into Danish hands. Key posts in Swedish administration were handed to Danes, and Danish troops garrisoned Swedish soil. The so-called Union bred resentment, suspicion, and simmering conflicts that would challenge the fragile alliance for generations. The question hung in the icy north. Could these kingdoms truly be one, or was the Kalmar Union a ticking time bomb? What happens when unity turns into subjugation? When the promise of strength becomes a chain? As Denmark tightened its grip, Sweden's identity and autonomy were at stake. The choices made in these turbulent decades would echo through centuries, shaping the fate of nations and the lives of millions caught in the crossfire of power, faith, and survival. The story was far from over, and the next chapters would be written in blood and fire. What drives a people to defy a mighty king? What fractures a union forged by crowns into bitter rivalry? In the cold stone castles, the Swedish nobles felt less like partners and more like pawns exploited by Danish overlords. Resentment simmered, erupting again and again into rebellion. The most famous uprising ignited in the year 1434, led by Engelbrekt Engelbrektsson, a minor noble with a burning charisma and keen leadership. Engelbrecht rallied peasants and townsfolk alike against King Eric of Pomerania, whose reign was marked by crushing taxes and ruthless oppression. Against all odds, the rebellion succeeded. King Eric was overthrown, and Sweden stepped out of the Union, if only for a few fleeting years. Yet this hard-won freedom was fragile. Engelbrecht's life was cut short by a treacherous conspiracy, and with his death, Danish control reasserted itself with cold efficiency. Throughout the 15th century, Sweden's fate swayed like a pendulum, slipping in and out of the Union repeatedly. At the heart of this turmoil was a bitter divide. Those who clung to the Union's stability, mainly the high nobility owning lands across Denmark and Sweden, versus the fiercely independent factions of minor nobles, peasants, and city dwellers crushed under Danish rule. This was no mere political quarrel. It was a war of identities, splitting families, turning friends into enemies, breeding betrayal as a daily survival tactic. Amidst this ruthless atmosphere of suspicion and intrigue, a new generation of Swedes emerged. They dreamed of more than temporary autonomy. They craved a strong, independent nation. But the Union itself was crumbling. By the dawn of the 16th century, King Christian II of Denmark, the tyrant, sought to crush this dream with iron and blood. In the year 1520, Christian marched into Sweden with a vast army, besieging Stockholm until the city fell. He promised amnesty to all who laid down arms, luring many into a deadly trap. Then came the event that would scorch Swedish memory forever: the Stockholm bloodbath. Over 2 brutal days in early November, about 80 people were executed: bishops, nobles, bourgeois, all those deemed enemies or threats to the king. Their bodies were displayed in the square, their heads impaled on stakes, a grisly message meant to break the spirit of a nation. But Christian miscalculated. Instead of submission, the massacre ignited a furious resistance. Among the slain was the father of a young nobleman, Gustav Eriksson Vasa. Gustav barely escaped death himself, held hostage by the Danes before daring a desperate flight. Orphaned and hunted, he vanished into forests and villages, disguising himself as a commoner, enduring hunger and hardship, but never surrendering. Gustav was a force of nature, relentless, stubborn, magnetic. He began building a coalition of the oppressed, peasants, miners, minor nobles, all who had suffered under Danish tyranny. The first attempts to spark rebellion faltered. Fear and doubt gripped the countryside. Yet Gustav's determination was unyielding. The legend tells of a moment in the village of Mora when rejection nearly broke him and he fled on skis. But then the people chased him down, pledging their support, choosing defiance over despair. This was a turning point, a choice that sealed Sweden's fate. Gustav's uprising grew, fueled by shared pain and hope. But the struggle was far from over. Far beyond battlefield victories, Gustav faced the daunting task of building a nation, transforming a fractured land scarred by decades of war into a sovereign state. To succeed, Gustav understood that freedom alone was not enough. The people needed education. The Bible was translated into Swedish, schools opened, and literacy spread, a foundation for a new national identity. The Reformation, sweeping across Europe, bolstered this identity further. Sweden embraced Protestantism, standing defiantly against the Catholic powers, Poland, Spain, and the papacy itself. This religious shift would shape Sweden's foreign policy for centuries to come. Gustav Vasa died in 1560, leaving behind a Sweden transformed, strong, centralized, and prosperous. He altered the rules of monarchy itself, establishing hereditary succession, binding the crown to his bloodline instead of fragile elections. His life was a chain of irreversible choices, each rippling through history with consequences as profound as they were inevitable. The story of Gustav Vasa is more than a tale of war and politics. It is a testament to human will clashing against fate, where every decision carries the weight of a nation's future. Follow Quiet History for more journeys into the turning points of our shared past. What if a ruler's mind became his own worst enemy? Eric XIV, eldest son of Sweden's stabilizing king, was brilliant yet dangerously unstable. His reign spiraled into chaos, torn by conflicts with nobles and even his own brothers. Ultimately, he was overthrown and imprisoned, his death shrouded in suspicion of poison. Could a kingdom survive such a fall? As Eric's shadow loomed over Sweden, his younger brother, Johann III, stepped onto a volatile throne. Johann sought moderation, but stirred deeper unrest. Married to a Polish Catholic princess, his sympathies clashed with the Protestant majority's fierce resistance. His reign became a tinderbox of religious tension, setting the stage for turmoil that no diplomacy could quell. Then came Sigismund, Johann's son, raised in the Catholic faith and crowned King of Poland. When he inherited the Swedish crown after his father's death, a crisis exploded. Sweden recoiled at the idea of a Catholic monarch ruling from afar. Was this the moment that would shatter the fragile unity forever? Enter Karl, Duke of Södermanland, Sigismund's uncle and fierce opponent. He rallied the opposition, plunging Sweden into a brutal civil war. When Karl triumphed, he seized the crown as Charles IX. A man of iron will and religious zeal, he cemented Sweden's identity as a Protestant fortress, pursuing ruthless persecution of Catholics and launching aggressive Eastern expansion. But could this fierce reign last? Charles IX's rule ended abruptly in 1611, passing the throne to his 17-year-old son, Gustavus Adolphus. With enemies at every border, Sweden faced simultaneous wars against Denmark, Poland, and Russia. Most young rulers would crumble under such pressure. But Gustavus was no ordinary king. At just 17, Gustavus Adolphus emerged as a visionary warrior and strategist. Understanding Sweden could not fight on all fronts simultaneously, he negotiated peace with Denmark and a truce with Russia, freeing his forces to focus on Poland. He captured Riga, seized Livonia, and transformed the Baltic Sea into a Swedish stronghold. But this was just the opening act. In 1618, Europe was engulfed by the 30 Years' War, a devastating clash veiled as a religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics. Behind the curtain, it was a ruthless battle for power, with the Catholic Habsburg Empire seeking dominance over Europe. Protestant princes were faltering, their cause near defeat. Could Sweden's young king turn the tide? Gustavus Adolphus chose to intervene, not only from faith, though his Lutheran conviction was deep, but from cold calculation. A Habsburg victory would choke Sweden's access to the Baltic, strangling its ambitions. His decision plunged Sweden into the heart of one of history's bloodiest wars, risking everything for survival and supremacy. Landing in Pomerania in 1630, Gustavus unleashed a military revolution. He transformed his army with speed, precision, and innovative artillery. His soldiers, fiercely loyal and expertly trained, followed their king into battle himself, sharing every danger. Every move was calculated, every victory a step closer to dominance, but the stakes grew ever higher. Within just 2 years, Gustavus Adolphus scored breathtaking victories, shattering Catholic forces at Breitenfeld, liberating Protestant lands, pressing all the way to Munich. His unstoppable momentum reshaped the balance of power in Europe. Yet in the shadows lurked the question: how far would his ambitions and his war go before the price became unbearable? From fractured beginnings, through betrayals and bloodshed, the path of Sweden's throne was carved by ruthless decisions and irreversible choices. Each ruler's fear and faith intertwined with the fate of nations. And in the crucible of war and religion, a young king rose to define an era. His story, a testament to the enduring power of will in a world on the edge of chaos. If you want to uncover more stories where history's greatest decisions shaped our world in fire and blood, subscribe to Quiet History. What does it mean to be a hero, to lead a nation against overwhelming odds? Gustavus Adolphus was hailed as the Lion of the North, a towering defender of Protestant faith. Yet his fate would shatter that legend forever. On the 6th of November, 1632, amidst the fog and roar of the Battle of Lutzen, the king was mortally wounded, his life extinguished at merely 38 years of age. His death was not just a loss, it was a seismic rupture that sent shockwaves through Sweden and the entire Protestant alliance. But how does a nation carry on when its beacon is extinguished? In the grim aftermath, Gustavus Adolphus's army, though leaderless, refused to collapse. Commanders took up the mantle, pushing forward with relentless resolve. Sweden, a small northern kingdom with barely over 1 million souls, clung tightly to its newfound stature as a rising power in Europe. The war dragged on, an unyielding tempest, until 1648, when the Peace of Westphalia finally brought the 30 Years' War to a close. Yet this was no simple truce. It was a monumental turning point, solidifying Sweden's grip on vast German territories, including western Pomerania with the port city of Stettin, the bishoprics of Bremen and Verden. Sweden emerged not just victorious, but as a key guarantor of European peace, wielding unprecedented influence over the Holy Roman Empire's fate. But power has a price. Sweden's military triumph masked a bleeding economy and simmering unrest at home. The aristocracy, fattened on war spoils and massive land grants, grew increasingly autonomous, their ambition colliding with the crown's authority. Meanwhile, the peasants bore the crushing weight of heavy taxes and relentless conscription. The fragile fabric of society stretched dangerously thin. Could a nation so exhausted by conflict sustain its dominance? As the shadows lengthened, destiny prepared to cast yet another wrench into Sweden's grand design. Enter Christina, Gustavus Adolphus's daughter, crowned at the tender age of 6. Raised under the watchful eye of Regent Axel Oxenstierna, a towering statesman who painstakingly continued her father's policies, Christina was destined for greatness, but also torment. Brilliant, cultured, and fiercely independent, she found little solace in the austere, rigid world of Protestant Sweden. Rejecting traditional expectations, she refused marriage, shunned the burdens of monarchy, and in 1654 shocked Europe by abdicating the throne and converting to Catholicism. Her flight to Rome marked the end of an era and the beginning of an uncertain future. Power passed to her cousin, Charles X, Gustav, an unrelenting warrior whose ambition reignited Sweden's expansionist fires. His boldest stroke? The audacious winter crossing of frozen straits to invade Denmark, a military maneuver that stunned the continent. His campaign swept across Poland and Denmark, securing vast new territories. Yet these conquests only stoked the fires of European resistance. Coalitions formed, alliances hardened, and the continent braced itself against Sweden's growing aggression. The relentless march of war carved deep scars, setting the stage for a brutal reckoning. Then, in 1660, Charles X died suddenly at 38, leaving behind a fragile legacy and a toddler heir, Charles XI. A long regency ensued, a period where nobles, intoxicated by power and wealth, ruled unchecked. Meanwhile, the military, previously Sweden's mightiest weapon, lay shattered. One catastrophic defeat after another culminated in the Battle of Poltava, a savage turning point that would break Sweden's imperial dream. The once feared lion found himself cornered, ravaged by the combined forces of Russia, Denmark, Poland, and Prussia, scavengers eager to tear apart a wounded giant. Charles XII returned from exile in 1614, determined to reclaim his kingdom's lost glory. Yet the tides of fate were merciless. His death during the siege of Fredriksten Fortress in 1618, shrouded in mystery, some whispering assassination by his own, weary of endless war, marked the definitive end of Sweden's great power era. He was only 36. The age of Swedish dominance was over, replaced by an uncertain and turbulent 18th century, a time of crisis and soul-searching for a nation that once commanded the Baltic with iron will. What? If you want to explore more stories where history's giants walk among us, where every choice could mean salvation or ruin, subscribe to Quiet History. Together, we'll unravel the past's darkest moments and illuminate the human heart behind the headlines. What happens when a once mighty empire, drained by endless wars, loses more than just territory? Sweden, battered and broken, had seen its overseas dominions slip away, its population dwindle. By the Treaty of Nystad in 1721, it surrendered crucial Baltic lands, Ingria, Karelia, the very territories fought over for decades, to Russia. The Baltic Sea was no longer a Swedish lake. But this loss was just the beginning of a storm brewing inside the kingdom. Fear and frustration ignited resistance against absolutism, blamed for the nation's collapse. Sweden's nobility forced a dramatic shift, restricting royal power and ushering in the Age of Liberty from 1720 to 1772. Real authority shifted to the Riksdag, where two fierce factions battled for control, the Hats and the Caps. The Hats pushed for aggressive foreign policy, dreaming of revenge and alliance with France. The Caps sought peace, economic growth, and a bond with Russia. Their bitter conflict paralyzed governance, breeding chaos and corruption. Yet, amid political dysfunction, a brilliant cultural and intellectual renaissance bloomed. Sweden transformed from a land of warriors to a cradle of enlightenment. The country embraced the Age of Enlightenment with fervor, founding scientific societies, an Academy of Sciences, and reforming education. Luminaries like Carl Linnaeus emerged, crafting the enduring system to classify plants and animals. Anders Celsius devised the temperature scale, still bearing his name. Literature, theater, and the arts flourished. But could a nation locked in political turmoil sustain such brilliance? The answer came in 1772. Gustav III, a young, educated, and ambitious monarch enamored with French culture, staged a coup. He arrested party leaders, dissolved the Riksdag, and restored royal authority. Yet not the old absolutism. Gustav saw himself as an enlightened ruler, governing for his people's welfare. He enacted reforms easing peasants' burdens, curbing noble privileges, improving justice by abolishing torture, and introducing freedom of the press. A patron of the arts, Gustav founded the Royal Swedish Opera, wrote plays, and hosted lavish masquerades. Stockholm blossomed into a European cultural capital. But not everyone embraced his vision. The nobility seethed, furious with their diminished power. Adding to unrest, Gustav launched a war against Russia in 1788, desperate to reclaim lost lands. The war failed disastrously, draining the treasury and fueling widespread dissatisfaction. The tension exploded in 1792 during a masked ball at the opera, when conspirators among the nobles fatally wounded the king. Gustav died days later. His assassination immortalized by Verdi's opera Un ballo in maschera. His son, Gustav IV Adolf, proved weak and incapable, dragging Sweden into the Napoleonic Wars alongside coalitions against France, courting further disaster. In 1708, Russia, allied with Napoleon, invaded and seized Finland, a crown jewel of the Swedish kingdom for over 6 centuries. The loss was a national catastrophe, shaking Sweden to its core. Gustav IV was overthrown in a military coup, replaced by his uncle, Charles XIII, an old, childless man. With no heir apparent, the Riksdag made an unprecedented choice, inviting French Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, a rising star of Napoleon's wars, to become crown prince. An unlikely candidate, a French general in line for the Swedish throne. But Bernadotte, soon Charles John XIV, proved an astute politician. He grasped the harsh reality. Sweden could no longer dream of military glory. Peace and stability were paramount. Playing a delicate diplomatic game, Bernadotte switched allegiance to Napoleon's enemies, setting Sweden on a new course, shaped by survival and cautious rebirth. From ruin to renaissance, from chaos to calculated calm, Sweden's fate hung on the razor's edge of bold decisions and devastating consequences. The choices of kings and commoners alike would echo through history, shaping a nation reborn from its ashes. If this story of power, fear, and irreversible turns grips you, subscribe now to Quiet History for more riveting tales carved from the shadows of the past. What price does a nation pay when it trades its soul for stability? In the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, Sweden made a fateful alliance against France, and as a reward, it acquired Norway, snatched away from Denmark. This union, forged in 1814, would last nearly a century, a fragile bond shadowed by deep tensions. But was Norway truly a compensation for the loss of Finland? The Finnish people shared Sweden's cultural roots, while Norwegians hungered for independence. The consequences of this uneasy union would ripple through Swedish history, setting the stage for a struggle between unity and division. King Karl Johan ruled until 1844, laying the groundwork for modern Sweden amidst internal upheaval. The 19th century was a crucible of transformation. Sweden abandoned its military ambitions and turned inward, embracing economic and social reform. This pivot was not without sacrifice. The nation, once agricultural and entrenched in tradition, began its painful metamorphosis into an industrial power. Iron ore mining, metallurgy, and engineering blossomed. Railways spread like veins through the land. Yet beneath the booming factories and rising cities, shadows of hardship festered. Alfred Nobel's invention of dynamite brought wealth and fame, but the fruits of industrial progress were bitter for many workers. Long hours, meager wages, and grueling conditions bred unrest. The seeds of rebellion sprouted in the form of early labor movements, trade unions, and socialist parties. By 1889, the Swedish Social Democratic Party emerged as a powerful voice demanding justice, better working conditions, universal suffrage, and sweeping social reforms. The ruling elite sensed a storm brewing that could shatter their world. How would they respond to this rising tide of dissent? Parliamentary reforms came slowly but inexorably. In 1866, the old estate-based Riksdag was replaced by a bicameral parliament, a radical shift that opened political participation beyond the aristocracy. By the dawn of the 20th century, all men gained the right to vote, and by 1921, women followed. Sweden was transforming into a more democratic and egalitarian society, but the battle for equality was far from over. Social inequality lingered, though it was less stark than in other nations. The common language, shared Lutheran faith, and collective memory forged a fragile unity that would both stabilize and strain the country. Sweden's political culture was shaped by pragmatism and compromise. Employers and unions, conservatives and socialists, learned to navigate the churning waters of conflict, crafting uneasy alliances. This delicate balance was tested anew with the surge of immigration at the turn of the century. As foreign faces and cultures entered Swedish cities, old tensions flared beneath the surface. How would the nation reconcile its ideals of solidarity with the challenges of a changing identity? The answers were as uncertain as they were urgent. The shadow of war loomed again with the outbreak of the Second World War. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Sweden declared neutrality, a stance fraught with peril. Surrounded by conflict, Nazi-occupied Denmark and Norway to the west, and the Soviet Union to the east, the country walked a razor's edge. Sympathy for Finland, attacked by the Soviets, stirred the hearts of many Swedes. Thousands volunteered to fight. Yet official policy forbade war. Was this cautious neutrality a betrayal or a necessary survival? The weight of that choice pressed down on a nation torn between conscience and pragmatism. When Germany occupied Denmark and Norway in 1940, Sweden found itself encircled by enemies and allies alike, trapped in a vice of geopolitical power. The decisions made within those tense years, decisions to aid, to resist, to endure, would define the essence of Swedish identity for generations. Every choice was a gamble with fate, a step into a dangerous unknown. In this crucible of fear and resolve, Sweden's true test had only just begun. What lines are we willing to cross when survival is on the line? Can pragmatism justify morally ambiguous decisions? And when does protection become complicity? Sweden faced these impossible questions as the storm of war loomed over Europe. In 1940, Sweden's position was perilously critical. The government made a fateful choice to concede certain demands to Nazi Germany in hopes of avoiding occupation. This meant allowing German troops to transit Swedish territory and selling iron ore essential for the German war machine. But what price would this uneasy peace demand? These concessions ignited fierce outrage among the Allies and sparked bitter debates within Sweden itself. Were these actions the work of traitors or the wisdom of pragmatists, cowards or shrewd guardians of their nation? The question still haunts history. Sweden's aid helped prolong Nazi aggression, but it also shielded the country from destruction. Amidst this shadowed complicity, another story unfolded, of courage and humanity. Thousands of Jews fleeing Denmark and Norway found refuge in Sweden. Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg forged a lifeline, issuing Swedish passports that saved tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews, all while knowing he risked becoming a prisoner himself. He vanished into the Soviet Gulag, a haunting symbol of sacrifice amid turmoil. When the guns finally fell silent, Sweden emerged strangely untouched. Unlike a continent ravaged by war and ruin, its economy thrived, its cities intact. This small nation was uniquely poised, not as a victim or conqueror, but as a beacon of recovery and rebuilding in a fractured Europe. Sweden channeled its prosperity into rebuilding the continent, extending credits, goods, and technical aid. Its industries roared at full power, exporting machinery, steel, paper, feeding a global hunger for renewal. Meanwhile, Swedish society transformed, investing in universal pensions, free education and health care, unemployment benefits, parental leave, building a welfare state that would become a global exemplar. Yet beneath the polished surface of this social democracy, tensions simmered. High taxes stifled entrepreneurial spirit. A sprawling bureaucracy crushed individuality. Conformity quietly became the norm. Was this fairy tale society silently suffocating its own creativity and freedom? Reform was urgent, but sluggish and painful. The old ways clung stubbornly to life as Sweden wrestled with how to preserve its ideals without suffocating innovation. The stakes were nothing less than the nation's soul. Could Sweden evolve, or would it be trapped by its own success? Amidst this societal strain, artists like Ingmar Bergman peeled back the glossy veneer, exposing spiritual loneliness and alienation beneath prosperity. His films questioned whether material wealth could ever truly guarantee happiness, revealing shadows lurking in the heart of the welfare state. Sweden's foreign policy remained steadfastly neutral, yet actively engaged. Neither NATO nor the Warsaw Pact Sweden claimed a path of non-alignment, but it shaped global diplomacy nonetheless. Dag Hammarskjöld, the nation's visionary diplomat and United Nations Secretary-General from 1953 to 1961, embodied this spirit until his mysterious death during a peace mission in Congo. Active in peacekeeping, championing disarmament and human rights, Sweden wielded moral authority far beyond its size. It became a small power with outsized influence, an emblem of principled neutrality in a polarized world. But the path forward remained uncertain, fraught with the consequences of choices past and the challenge of adapting to an unforgiving future. Was Sweden's survival during World War II a triumph of wisdom or a gamble with its conscience? Could prosperity built on compromise endure? The answers remain elusive, etched into a history of fateful decisions and their irreversible consequences. For more stories unspooled from the threads of history's toughest dilemmas, subscribe to Quiet History. What happens when a political dynasty collapses after 4 decades? How does a nation face the shattering of its long-held power structures? In 1976, the Social Democrats, who had ruled nearly uninterrupted since the 1930s, lost their grip on Sweden's government for the first time in 40 years. The bourgeois coalition rose to power amidst hope and expectation. Yet within a short span, they failed to solve the mounting crises that gripped the country, forcing the Social Democrats back into control. But the old order was forever changed, and the tension between past and future was only beginning to build. The 80s and 90s tore apart Sweden's identity. The world was shrinking fast, global forces pressing relentlessly against the isolated Swedish model. Could a nation known for its social welfare shield withstand the tides of globalization? The answer came in a series of bold, irreversible reforms. Taxes slashed, regulations eased, state-owned companies sold off. Sweden's cherished welfare state did not disappear. It morphed, becoming more flexible, more open to the brutal logic of markets. Yet beneath this pragmatic adaptation, a silent struggle brewed, a quest to balance freedom and solidarity that would haunt the nation for decades to come. Enter 1995, Sweden's fateful choice to join the European Union. On the surface, it was a calculated step toward economic expansion, access to vast markets, and a stronger voice on the global stage. But at what cost? The transfer of sovereignty to distant Brussels stirred deep fears. Could Sweden preserve its unique social fabric under the shadow of supranational power? The referendum split the nation almost evenly. 52% in favor, 48% opposed. A razor-thin margin that revealed profound uncertainty. The country stepped forward, but clung tightly to its krona, refusing to surrender its currency to the Eurozone, embodying the quintessential Swedish compromise: integration with guarded independence. At the dawn of the 21st century, Sweden stood tall as a global powerhouse of innovation and technology. Giants like Ericsson, Volvo, IKEA, Saab, and H&M Mauritz were not just companies. They were symbols of a nation that had mastered progress and prosperity. The economy surged on the wings of education and cutting-edge industries. Sweden was a beacon, a model of fairness and governance admired worldwide. Yet, beneath this shimmering surface of success, fault lines were deepening, echoes of unease that would soon grow louder. Immigration, the double-edged sword of refuge and challenge, emerged as one of Sweden's most profound dilemmas. A nation built on values of humanitarianism and solidarity opened its arms wide to those fleeing wars and violence, from the Balkans to Iraq, Somalia to Syria and Afghanistan. The generosity was vast: housing, benefits, education. But integration faltered. Language barriers, cultural divides, unemployment, and isolated communities stirred tensions. The ideal of inclusivity clashed with harsh realities, threatening the very cohesion Sweden had long treasured. Then came the battle against climate change, a new frontier fraught with sacrifice and uncertainty. Sweden set ambitious environmental goals, demanding the closure of coal plants, higher energy prices, and profound lifestyle shifts. Yet, the price of progress was a bitter pill for many. The nation's reliance on nuclear power, a low-carbon but controversial energy source, added layers of conflict. How to reconcile energy security, economic competitiveness, and ecological responsibility? The complex dance of competing priorities pushed Sweden into uncharted and turbulent waters. Today, Sweden is a land of stark contrasts. It remains one of the world's most prosperous and just societies, boasting high living standards, low corruption, robust institutions, and a fierce commitment to human rights and gender equality. Its culture and science flourish. Yet the shadows of the past decades linger. Questions about identity, integration, and sustainability refuse to fade. The nation's resilience is tested daily as the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, openness and preservation, hangs by a thread. Swedes take pride in their healthcare system, their education, and their social protections. But beneath that pride lies a constant tension, a question that will define Sweden's future. Can a society hold fast to its values while embracing inevitable change? The answers remain elusive, the debates fierce, and the stakes nothing less than the soul of a nation itself. Follow Quiet History to uncover more stories where history's choices echo through time, shaping the world we live in today. What if the very decisions that define a nation's soul can also become its greatest curses? How does a country balance between ambition and humility, between progress and tradition? Sweden's story is one of irreversible choices, some triumphant, others haunting, that have shaped its destiny. And in this tale, every victory hides a shadow. Every peace conceals a tension ready to erupt. Imagine a land where warriors once sailed fierce seas, Viking ships cutting through icy waters, driven by hunger for glory and wealth. From these fierce beginnings, Sweden transformed, not overnight, but through centuries marked by relentless change. The Christianization of the Vikings wasn't just a spiritual shift. It was the birth of a medieval kingdom that stitched together shards of tribal chaos into a fragile unity. But was unity enough? Then came the Golden Age, the era when Sweden stood tall as a European superpower. Under leaders like Gustavus Adolphus, the nation carved out an empire with iron and blood. Yet the flood of victories hid a looming crisis. The Battle of Poltava shattered Sweden's dreams, stripping it of its great power status. Was this defeat the end, or a dark beginning? Instead of collapsing under the weight of loss, Sweden did something astonishing. It liberated itself from the chains of military ambition. The fall at Poltava became a strange kind of victory, a chance to rebuild not through war, but peace. 2 centuries without conflict, a rare beacon in Europe, became Sweden's new identity. But peace is fragile, and beneath the calm, old tensions simmered. The Swedish model emerged, neither pure capitalism nor pure socialism, but a delicate hybrid that demanded constant balance, a nation walking a razor's edge between competing interests, where compromise was survival. Yet, this balance was not without sacrifice. The philosophy of lagom, not too much, not too little, governed not just policy but a national psyche. Was this moderation a strength or a cage? Beneath the surface of consensus lay the shadow of jantelagen, the law of Jante, an unspoken rule forbidding anyone from standing out, from claiming to be better than others. It ensured equality, yes, but also suffocated ambition and individuality. What happens when a society values conformity over creativity? When does order become oppression? Sweden's proud welfare state, a paragon of education and social security, hides a troubled past. Between the 1930s and 1970s, tens of thousands deemed unfit were sterilized without consent. This dark chapter stains the nation's humanitarian reputation. How could a land of compassion turn so cold? Then there was the uneasy alliance during World War II, quiet cooperation with Nazi Germany that questions the very moral foundations of Swedish neutrality. The fear and calculation that led to such choices haunt the collective memory. Can survival justify complicity? Today, Sweden faces turmoil of a new kind. Rising social inequality, aging populations burdening social support, the struggle to integrate immigrants, and the fracturing of political consensus under the weight of populism and polarization. These are not isolated challenges, but echoes of deeper tensions. How long can this equilibrium hold? Yet, Sweden does not yield. It experiments, adapts, learns. The nation's greatest strength may lie in its unyielding will to change without losing its core values. As the modern world teeters on the edge of unprecedented technological, ecological, and geopolitical upheavals, Sweden's story offers a powerful lesson: the cost of choices, the price of peace, and the relentless pursuit of balance. If you found this journey through Sweden's turbulent history captivating, subscribe to Quiet History for more stories of fate, fear, and the weight of decisions that shape our world. What does it truly mean to preserve humanity in a world ruled by relentless technology? How do you ensure justice in a global economy that often feels cold and unyielding? How can a nation protect its environment without sacrificing the very engines of its growth? These are not questions with simple answers, especially in a time when democracy teeters on the edge, threatened by populism and waves of disinformation. Yet, Sweden's story offers a powerful lesson. The answers lie not in extremes, but in balance. Not in confrontation, but in dialogue. Not in isolation, but openness to the world. But can these ideals withstand the inevitable storms ahead? Imagine a people who once were fierce Vikings, raiders of seas and lands, who transformed over centuries into peaceful social democrats. This transformation was no clean break from the past, but a profound reimagining of identity. The very traits that made Vikings relentless, tenacity, a thirst for risk, entrepreneurial spirit, and a hunger to explore did not vanish. They evolved, finding new life in modern Sweden's fearless companies sailing global markets, engineers pushing the limits of technology, and diplomats negotiating in the halls of the United Nations with unwavering resolve. What does this continuity mean for the soul of a nation? Sweden is more than geography. Its borders have shifted countless times. More than ethnicity, modern Sweden thrives on multiculturalism. More than language, although the Swedish tongue remains a vital thread in national identity. At its core, Sweden might be an idea, a society where every individual is entitled to a dignified life, where the strong lift the weak, where conflicts are resolved not by violence but through dialogue, where nature is honored, education treasured, and equality fiercely pursued. This idea has never been perfect, but it burns like a beacon, guiding the nation through turbulent times. But can this idea survive the relentless pressures of change? History forces us to confront a brutal truth. Progress always has its price. Sweden's rise came at a cost, the loss of ancient gods, songs long forgotten, and a way of life irreversibly altered. Modern Swedes no longer speak runes, no longer offer sacrifices in sacred groves. The connection to the past has frayed, fragile, but not severed. Museums safeguard artifacts, scholars decipher ancient texts, enthusiasts rebuild Viking ships. Yet this is mere reconstruction, a pale echo rather than a living tradition. What is lost when a people trade deep-rooted heritage for modernization? What emptiness lingers beneath the surface of progress? This melancholy pervades Swedish culture, from the haunting films of Ingmar Bergman to the bittersweet melodies of ABBA, from the novels of Astrid Lindgren to today's quiet streets. Nations do not march forward in straight lines. They stumble, circle back, and sometimes lose their way before finding forward again. Sweden's story reveals that a nation's character is not fixed or predetermined. It is forged through the crucible of history, shaped by choices made and paths taken. The Vikings were not doomed to remain warriors. The modern Swedes are not slaves to any single ideology. Each generation recreates itself, wrestling with the past, what to keep, what to discard, and grappling with the present, what to embrace, what to reject. This is the ongoing drama of history, a relentless act of creation and destruction. And at its core, Sweden's history is human history, the story of people who loved fiercely and hated bitterly, dreamed wildly and feared deeply, fought relentlessly and sought peace, built anew and tore down the old. They struggled to find their place in an unforgiving world, striving always to build a life worth living. The question remains, will they prevail? If this story moved you, subscribe to Quiet History for more journeys into the past that shape our present. The past is never done with us, and neither is the story of Sweden. What if a single decision could echo across centuries? What ghosts whisper beneath the northern lights? In the frozen silence of a polar night, beneath the shimmering auroras that dance above ice-bound lakes, history does not sleep. The stillness of ancient forests heavy with snow conceals the weight of untold stories waiting to shatter the calm. Imagine the relentless waves of the Baltic Sea crashing against jagged rocky shores, each splash a heartbeat of an age-old struggle. Here, the clangor of Viking swords once shattered the quiet, their sagas etched into the frozen earth, their battles deciding the fate of kingdoms. The roar of cannon fire in monumental wars shook these coasts, marking a turning point no one could undo. Can you hear the prayers whispered in stone churches, ancient and steadfast? Those sacred moments bore witness to decisions that would shape lives for generations. Meanwhile, the factories and mills churned smoke and steel, forging progress at the cost of sweat and sacrifice. Each clang, each cry, each triumph and tragedy intertwined in a relentless current of cause and consequence. And what of the voices of those who dared to demand justice? The demonstrators whose resolve echoed through city streets, shaking the pillars of power. Their courage was a gamble, one choice that could lead either to freedom or ruin. A tipping point veiled in uncertainty and fear. This is not merely a tale of geography or governance. Sweden lives as an idea, an enduring dream caught between freedom and justice, prosperity and equality, tradition and progress. Every moment remembered, every story told, binds the past to the future in a relentless chain. But what if the next link breaks? What if the lessons remain unheeded? The laughter of children in today's classrooms is the fragile sound of hope, but it is also a reminder. History is made by choices, often irreversible, frequently forged in fear. Will those who come after us remember, reflect, and dare to change the course? Or will they inherit only the shadows of forgotten battles and unlearned lessons? Sweden's story is a crucible of human decisions and their staggering consequences. It is a relentless tide of past echoes crashing into the present, demanding remembrance and vigilance. As long as these stories are told, as long as the memories endure, the dream of a better world persists, fragile, fierce, and unyielding. Join us here on Quiet History to delve deeper into these moments that shaped nations and destinies. Subscribe, engage, and help keep these stories alive, because the future depends on the choices we choose to remember.